What do you think about when you hear the word mission? Lots of connotations to the word, but these days it's a word in common currency, isn't it? We hear the word mission all the time. Everyone's got their personal mission statement. You go into McDonald's, you see a mission statement. People are very concerned to build their own sense of identity and purpose and mission in this world. Oprah Winfrey, for instance, has her own personal mission statement. She wants to be a teacher and known for inspiring her students and helping them to go further than they ever could go before. Most of us, when we think about mission, tend to personalise it. We tend to ask questions like, well, where should I go? Where should I serve God? What does God want me to do? And am I called for the mission field? We tend to focus on those types of questions. And there's certainly a place for that. And certainly as European Christian Mission, we want to help people with those questions. But I think it's jumping the gun a bit. It's jumping the gun. Because what can often happen is we get our own ideas about identity and purpose and mission. We work it out for ourselves, and then somehow God's just kind of meant to come along and help us. But what about God's mission? Is God's mission the one that we're truly embracing? Is God's mission the one that we're fitting into? Are we understanding truly God's mission and embracing it for ourselves? That's the challenge. You see, God's mission is a rescue mission that demands all of us. God won't be fitted in to our neat little lives. You probably have seen the movie and the book Schindler's List, a very popular movie that came out in the 90s, Spielberg. It's a great movie, I really love it, but it portrays this guy, Oskar Schindler, who's a German businessman, and he's not particularly committed to Nazism or anything like that. His life's about making money. And so he sets up factories in Poland to help the war effort. And he gets the idea of using cheap Jewish labour. He sees what's happening in terms of the ghettos and Jews being transferred to concentration camps. And he thinks, here's an opportunity. I'll get them to work in my factories. Effectively, the Nazis have in mind that the Jews become slave labour. And so we see the development of his business. At one point, Oskar starts to realise what's really at stake here. What's really happening. He's on horseback, riding with his wife outside Krakow, and he sees the way that the Nazis are treating the Jews. And it's not just a matter of transferring them to concentration camps. He just sees that willy-nilly they're killing Jews. He sees this is actually about genocide. This is about extermination. And so he realises with the Jews that are on his list to work in his factory, that that's actually a matter of life and death. This is a matter of saving lives, what he is doing. And from that moment, that Krakow moment where he looks over and sees what's really happening, he starts to have real compassion for the Jews. And he starts to realise, I need to think outside the box about how to get more people on my list. And so the movie's about that, about the ways and means that he bends over backwards, and even to the point that he goes broke in order to save more and more Jews. Do we need a Krakow moment to see what's really going on, to really see the darkness of this world outside of Christ, that people outside of Christ are lost for eternity, and that we have a part to play in terms of their rescue? Well, Matthew's gospel is all about God's rescue in Jesus. And here Jesus is taking his disciples, his followers, on a journey of helping them to understand what truly his mission is and how people can embrace it for themselves. The passage here today is one of my favourites because it gives in a nutshell the steps that we need to take, that disciples need to take in order to understand God's mission and embrace it. It's a journey. We can't go straight into questions like, am I called and what specifically should I do, until we go through these steps of understanding what God's mission is like. We read there in verse 35, didn't we, about the way that Jesus saw the crowds and had compassion, verse 35. He saw people and he had compassion. This is the first step towards mission, is to see the world for truly what it is, as Jesus saw it, and to have compassion. Compassion, as the original word suggests, is very much about what you feel in your guts. Whether you feel that sense of the need of people around you and willing to reach out, and it's something that affects you even internally. This is what Jesus had. And the first step to that is really seeing people where they're at. We can so often just focus on the externals, can't we? The appearance of people, whether they've achieved or whether they haven't achieved, whether they're well-dressed, whether they're not well-dressed, whether they seem wealthy, whether they're poorer. But what's really going on for them? As we look at the crowds in the inner west, in a Burwood or wherever we are, we often don't really see people and don't really see the crowds as Jesus saw them. But Jesus saw people for who they really were. Jesus is Emmanuel, he's God with us. And we see here in his ministry that he has compassion on people in various ways. He heals the sick, he feeds the hungry, he preaches in a compassionate way. And yet he knew that as he fed people, that they would get hungry again. As he healed the sick, they'd eventually get sick and die. He saw right down to the core that what they most needed was a shepherd, and that what he'd come to do is to be their shepherd, the shepherd who lays down his life for the sheep. It's quite unflattering, actually, to be called a sheep. So the Bible often refers to human beings in general and the people of God as sheep. If you ask a farmer about sheep, they'll tell you, they'll set you straight if you have kind of any romantic notions of sheep. They are actually reasonably difficult animals to keep. You have to keep protecting them. You have to keep a lookout for them. In and of themselves, they'll die. They've got too many natural predators. They too easily get lost. When there's disasters happening, they don't help themselves to be saved. For instance, if there's a bushfire, they don't run away. They just all huddle together. Or if there's a flood, they don't go to higher ground. They just stay there, unlike some other animals that tend to go to higher ground. Very few things that they will actually do to help you look after them. And even if you've got a sheep that's lost, it won't cooperate in its rescue. You have to bind it up and you have to fight it to be able to rescue it. This is how the Bible portrays us as people, I think, at root, who cannot save themselves, who don't want to be saved and need a shepherd to lead them home. There's a comedy that I quite like, a comedy movie called Planes, Trains and Automobiles. It was a movie that was done in the 80s. I'm not sure if anyone saw it. I'm showing a bit my age. But a great movie where it's all about getting stuck with someone that you really find difficult to be with and just trying to get away. So Steve Martin plays this character. He's a fairly well-to-do executive and he wants to get home from New York to Chicago for the Thanksgiving holiday. But he gets stuck next to John Candy, who's this loud, annoying type of person. But no matter what he does to get away, he ends up being on the same mode of transport or having his plans cancelled and being on the same mode of transport as John Candy. So he finds this guy really difficult. He does things like takes his shoes off, next to him, and he lets out his foot odor and things like that. You just constantly see ways in which this guy is annoying. And yet, eventually at the end of the movie, and this is what I love about the movie, almost a penultimate scene, and they're just about to say goodbye to one another. So Steve Martin is there in Chicago, just about to knock on his door and enjoy Thanksgiving finally. But then the truth comes out about John Candy. He's actually got nowhere to go. His wife died 8 years ago. He's got no permanent address. And so Steve Martin, he's basically trying to get away and work out a way to sort of end it and so that he can enjoy his Thanksgiving. So he says an awkward goodbye, and yet he realizes as he's walking to his door, this guy has nobody. And this guy's a human being. And he sees John Candy for who he is, and he has compassion, and he invites him into Thanksgiving. Just love that scene. But do we see people like that as people who've been made in the image of God? And so are either right with God and having a relationship with God, what they are made for, or not? That central question. Do we see people like that? What are we doing to reach out for them? There's a mission on our local doorstep, isn't there, in that sense? Think of just millions in Sydney alone who don't know Jesus and have probably never heard a clear explanation of the gospel before. Jesus came to be our great good shepherd, to rule us, to forgive us, and to make us new. He didn't just have compassion in the sense of feeling things, but he put it into practice. He laid down his life to take the condemnation that we deserve, that we as sheep have gone astray. We do not deserve a relationship with God. We so easily fall into things that are not good for us and don't honour Jesus. And yet Jesus has compassion and goes to the cross. That's at the heart of God's mission. God wants us to see the world his way and have compassion and be involved in pointing people to their need of Jesus, the shepherd, the good shepherd who lays down his life. So that's the first step. We need to see people with compassion. But the second step is also really important. And for this, I actually want to go to the end of that short passage that we had a look at, verse 38. So we're going to skip past that part where it talks about that the workers are few and there is a great harvest. But we're going to look at verse 38, where it talks about the important command that we have for anyone who would seek to be involved in God's mission. Let's have a look. Jesus says, "Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field." Ask. Pray. Praying. Mission involvement all starts with prayer. You know, sometimes as missionary organisations or even churches, we focus on those who go as missionaries. The focus is on going, the challenge to go. Some should go. Other times we say, well, if you can't go, well, you can give. There's financial needs in supporting a missionary. But then if you can't give, well, you can always pray. You can just pray. Just pray. For Jesus, it all starts with prayer. It's all a matter of prayer. In fact, if you think you can go, or if you think you can give and be heavily involved in God's mission, you're kidding yourself. Because the first step is always prayer connection. It's always asking God. Prayer is not some third-class mission involvement. It's at the core. Romans 15:30, a great verse. Paul, perhaps the greatest missionary to ever live, says this: "I urge you, brothers and sisters, by our Lord Jesus Christ and by the love of the Spirit, to join with me in my struggle by praying for me." He doesn't see himself as doing the real mission work and then others are sort of on the sidelines cheering him on, giving the occasional prayer. He sees those Roman Christians as what they are doing as the work of mission with him, struggling with him, joining with him. It's important. It's essential. And we need to be involved in it. So let me encourage you that your prayers are not in vain. Your prayers are central to God's mission. It's a great relief, though, isn't it, that as we ask the Lord of the harvest, we know that it's God's mission and that he's the missionary and that he's sending workers. He's the chief superintendent of missions. We have mission directors, but I'm not the true mission director. I'm just one of his workers. And the first step is to ask that God, the missionary, would send out workers, people who share his heart into the world. That prayer will involve many things. To send workers, as I know, is complicated. There has to be workers raised up. They have to be prepared for the work. You have to send them fully supported according to their financial needs. And then there's the work of support and so forth so that they can have longevity on the field. It's not an easy thing by any means to send workers, and that's why we need your prayers, and we thank you for your prayers. Those who pray are not often as recognised or as honoured as maybe they should be, though. As human beings, we tend to glorify the ones who are the best at things, who are the upfront people, the best in the class, the best sportsmen, in terms of the missionary world, the best preacher or those who can speak language the best. And yet, the real action for mission, according to this verse, is in the back rooms where we're praying. And I thank God so much for people who've said to me at times, I pray for you every day. Amazing. When you were in Portugal, I prayed for you every day. One such lady, a lady in Weewar, which is in northwest New South Wales, a couple actually, when I first met them, who were cotton farming and just about to retire. So as you can see, they're older people, but incredible energy, but they love the Lord and they were prayers. And it was just a great thing to hear that Nita, the lady, said to me, I prayed for you every day in Portugal and I still pray for you. Fantastic thing. So, when it was a real struggle for me at times to know that she was praying for me, that she was allowing that God's work of sending would keep going through me and others, it was a great thing. When I couldn't even get two words together in Portuguese, there she was praying for me. There she was praying when we were having struggles with Team Unity when we were in Lisbon. Or when I was able to share the gospel with someone and someone was receiving the gospel, she was there praying. What a fantastic thing. And even where there were people who had once responded, who were falling away, she was still praying. God wants to use us to achieve his mission goals. He wants us to embrace his mission. We don't take seriously that, do we, enough? That he wants to use us, that he wants to enact his glorious plans through our prayers. Now, if President Biden was your friend, for instance, United States President, and you had a chat with him, and he said to you, at any time, no matter what I'm doing, if you ring, I'm going to try and pick up and I'm going to try to attend to your needs. And anything that you think is important for the world, I'm going to listen to, I'm going to try and enact. Now, do you think you might take him up on that? Maybe just once? Of course you would. But think of God, who is far more merciful, far more powerful than a President Biden. And we have that offer that he wants to meet our needs, but not just in a sort of self-centered kind of way, but he wants to meet our needs in the best possible way. And he wants to enact the things that are most important for the world through our prayers. Incredible, isn't it? So let's take that challenge. So where are we up to? Getting involved in God's mission. We need to see people with compassion. We need to pray as God has commanded us. And the third step, so that God's mission becomes your mission, is we need to grow in our understanding of what it means to take part in mission. We've talked about prayer, but other aspects as well. We've talked about how the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. There's a great problem, isn't there? There's a shortage of workers out there. Even in Sydney, there's a shortage, let alone the world, let alone places like Europe. And yet we see the potential of missions as well. Jesus looks around the crowds and he sees a harvest. The harvest is plentiful. People, if they would hear the good news, they would respond. They would bow the knee before the Lord Jesus and live lives to his glory and enjoy eternity with him. There's potential out there. What do you see when you see crowds? Do you see that potential? And do you see the shortage? You know, it's the bread and butter of mission to send workers out into the harvest field. We need to send them to the right places, to the most needy places, don't we? Only through Jesus is there the offer of forgiveness and new life and an eternity in heaven. It's as people know Jesus that they receive these things. Do we feel the weight of that? There's local and global dimensions to the mission, isn't there? As we meet together, as we gather to worship the Lord, as we encourage one another, we're sent out every week into the world. So we have an opportunity to be sent as God's workers locally. But you know, God's not simply just hiring to be workers here in Sydney. When I say hiring, I often look at shop windows and I see these jobs for hire. And it's funny, it doesn't matter if I'm completely unsuited, I still imagine myself doing the job. Just think about it. Just for a second. Now, Jesus is hiring. Jesus expects that all of his followers will be productive in his service, in working for him. And Jesus is not only hiring for a local mission opportunity, but also for global mission. And this is where the challenge is to think about what about me in terms of the great needs around the world. As I said, you don't have to be your stereotypical type of person to be a missionary. There are certain things that I'll go into in a sec about what we should be looking for in people. But you know, they come in many different shapes and sizes. Just recently, we sent out a lady named Karen, who's a single lady in her 30s, who's a medical doctor. And we sent her out to be a medical doctor in Rostock in Germany, which is northeast Germany, the most atheistic part of Europe. So there, most people call themselves atheists. Very few people actually call themselves Christians, and even less so Bible-believing Christians. But she wants to go there to serve as a doctor in a place that's got lots of problems with COVID-19. But she just wants to give her life in terms of being able to serve faithfully as a doctor, but share the gospel, to share a life as well, to shine as a light in that place. Give thanks for people like Karen, who are prepared to count the cost for the sake of the gospel, for the sake of being able to present the gospel to those who otherwise would have very little opportunity, if not no opportunity, to hear about Jesus. But let me put it down to the 4 Gs that we're looking for when it comes to sending people overseas. And I'm sure missionary agencies across the board would agree with me. The first G is the gospel. People need to know the gospel. They need to understand the gospel. In Portugal, when I was there, I never came across somebody outside the evangelical church who, when I started talking to them, I realized they already understood the gospel. Not once. You would have thought in 12 years, I would have got that. But people do not know the gospel. Even if they've been raised up in the established church, generally speaking, they have no idea. You get talking about what you've come to do, about who Jesus really is, and I've never came across somebody who thought that, yeah, I've just heard all of that before. They've always got questions. They've always got that sense of, I've never quite heard it put like that before. Even within the evangelical church, there's so many needs for people who understand the gospel with clarity, can teach the Bible with clarity, can understand how the Old and the New Testaments form together to focus on Jesus and to focus on the gospel. There's so many needs for people who understand the gospel and can communicate it. Sure, in another language. But this is part of the problem. Unless you know the gospel, you'll go there and you'll make a hash of it. Because as you translate, and through your lack of clarity, perhaps you'll be asking them to change things in their culture that don't need to be changed, and you'll just be confusing them. So we need people who understand the gospel. Another G is you need to be a goer, someone who goes. The Great Commission is about going. So a literal way to see the Great Commission is about, by going, make disciples of all nations. And we do that because all authority has been put on Jesus. Going. Are you a goer? Not everyone can leave their cultural setting and their home, but some should, some need to leave their setting, to leave their country support network, to learn another language, to be a part of another culture. You need to be a goer and to be able to count that cost. Another G, third G, is you need to be gifted. Gifted in various ways to serve. So it's not so much that you can do certain things in your local area, but what could you do on the mission field? As ECM, that's part of our training, is to be able to help people to work out if they're the kind of person for world missions, if they have the set of giftedness that could be used in missions. Last of all, and this is the most important, you could have these first three that I've mentioned and still be a terrible missionary. And we shouldn't be sending you. But the fourth G is the most important, godly. You have to be somebody who knows Jesus and is being transformed to be like Jesus. Otherwise, your life will speak much more loudly and drown out your message. You need to be a servant like Jesus was, who didn't come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. That's the type of person that we need to be sending out, someone who is a servant, who's willing to live with the people and work with the people and not put themselves above others. If people in a different culture see that you're not doing that, they will get a completely wrong message. It's interesting, when we were about to leave Portugal, my wife and I, we had a farewell and a celebration service, but it ended up being very emotional with lots of people speaking and that kind of thing, and people saying things that were probably too kind. But I was hoping that maybe they would mention something that I said in a sermon or something I taught or whatever. Didn't say any of that. But they mentioned things like, oh, we're so grateful that you took our kids home after Bible study week after week. You know, and we're so grateful when we were going through the global financial crisis and the government subsidies for our students weren't coming through, that you helped these students who are in dire poverty. We're so grateful for you. Or when my child was sick in hospital and we weren't sure that he was going to make it, you came and visited. Or when my son or when my daughter was going through a crisis of faith and you were there and you helped them and now they're firm in Jesus, thank you. They're the kinds of things that people remember. They're the kinds of things that a servant does. And certainly we weren't always servants, but they are the things that we're remembered for. They're the things that really touch people. Let's be the kind of people that God can send, locally and globally. If you grow in all of these areas, you'll be a great blessing to the local church. You'll be a great blessing to Jono here, I'm sure. And please keep growing in these areas. But you'll also be more sendable, and we would love to speak to you. You know, most people think when it comes to missionary work, you send out a younger person, you know, someone who's like late 20s, early 30s, you know, lots of energy. But these days, you know, I keep meeting 65-year-olds who have just as much energy as a 25-year-old and who have so much energy for missions. Why aren't we sending them? Maybe you're not too old. Maybe you're not too young. God could have you as his worker overseas. Just to end off, the last scene in Schindler's List. Schindler is there with all of these people who were on his list who managed to survive the war. And he's presented with a ring from one of his chief assistants. And it's a verse from the Talmud, the Jewish scriptures. And it said, he who saves a life saves a nation. Now, this was given to Oskar Schindler, and Schindler looked at it and he broke down and he said, but I did so little and I could have done so much more. You know, here's my car. my red car, I could have sold it, and that could have allowed even more people to be on the list. I could have done more. When we think about our lives and we think about that great day where we'll appear before Jesus and the new heavens and the new earth are revealed, and we look back, let's not be the ones who have to say, but I could have done so much more. I could have really understood and embraced God's mission at a deeper level, and I didn't. Now's the time to embrace God's mission. Let's make God's mission our mission.